Yeah, let's do it.
All right. We're loosened up.
We're loosened up.
I had a little puff, too.
Steve had a puff or two.
I got water. I got my notes.
Yep.
I got
a crap top.
crap top.
Just for referring to a couple things.
Welcome to I'd Buy That for $1, a podcast about inexpensive, common, and underappreciated records that are waiting to be rediscovered. I'm your host, Sean Hartman, lead leaf peeper and weary woodsman at the Himalayan Quasar Magnet School.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I've come a long way.
That's true. When you first started down that path, I wondered, is he really going to stick this through the whole way to be what you've become?
Well, you know what they say, pigeons can't drop on you if they never flew.
Ooh, I like that.
Wow. It's getting deep already here on this.
Imparting some wisdom.
I'm co-host Jeremy, and I am the co-founder of the HGMA.
What's the HGMA?
It's the Hurdy-Gurdy Maximalist Association. That one's for you, Peter.
Oh, well, it's a good thing you ran that one by me in the car on the way over here.
Yeah, I didn't want to upset you too much. Peter and I have a little thing. I'm sure we'll get into it more later.
Oh, I'm sure it's bound to come up. Well, I am co-host Peter Cook, and I am the prior president of the Maddie Former fan club. Wait, strike that. Reverse it. the former president of the Maddie Pryor fan club.
Ooh, nice.
I see what you did there.
Got it. I'm Steve Krakow. Some know me as Plastic Crime Wave. And I'm a maxi minimalist.
Oh.
Of the hurdy-gurdy or just generally?
Just generally speaking.
Okay.
Well, welcome back, Steve Plastic Crime Wave Krakow. It's been a little while since we had you on the show. By a little while, I mean, 2.5 years.
Yeah.
About a pandemic's worth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is like a homecoming.
We are back in your lair in Chicago once again, minus Sean, who is joining us from Philly as per usual.
Mm-hmm.
Jeremy and I are here in Chicago, and
you can hear that rumble of the Chicago traffic out there.
it's making its way into our mics and ears.
Find Western Avenue, the longest continuous residential street in America.
Is it really?
Yes.
Well,
How about that?
Residential. That was the word I was missing for a long time because people would correct me, yada, yada, residential.
Yeah, that's important to know. Yeah,
It is.
Yeah. Like,
I gotta say, this room we're in is not minimalist at all, Steve. This is maximalism pure.
at its most maximum. Yeah, for those who have never witnessed a video or a tour of Plastic Crime Wave Lair, it's quite the thing to see. Every bit of wall space and shelf space is occupied with how would you want to describe them? I don't want to use the wrong word.
Ephemera?
Yeah,
No.
that's what I was kind of thinking.
Yeah, I sadly, collecting, that's a word that's just kind of...
It's loaded.
It's loaded. It's been run into the ground a little bit. Yeah, I'm kind of a stuff person. I'm comics, magazines, records, books, movies, VHS, paperbacks.
Yep.
I like it all.
And you're also a musician, illustrator, curator, impresario.
Throw that one in there.
Yeah, it's a long time Chicago staple.
Been here a while, and in this very lair.
Yeah, for over a quarter century now, we'll say.
Yes,
just over.
Yes. So the walls are closing in a little bit.
What did you pull from your stash here to discuss with us today? For our opening month of season 4, we're talking records from 1972.
Yes, for the 72, I went for a little Steeleye span, Below the Salt. How would you, medieval acid folk rock? I don't know. It's a hard one to sort of pigeonhole, but it's funny. I'm looking at my copy right now and I'm noticing it must have been a radio station copy because there's little marked somehow, and mine was $2.
You paid $2 for it.
I have a $2 sticker on it, but they gave me a pass on this one. So
we
never let it be said they're not open-minded here at I'll buy that for $1. It can be, I'll buy that for $2.
Yeah. If we stuck to strictly dollar records, we would really limit ourselves here.
This has surely been in a dollar bin somewhere. Surely.
Oh, yes. Yep. Steeleye spanned pretty much their entire discography, minus maybe the first album. That one usually fetches a little bit more, I would say, but almost everything else you're going to find for like $5.
And this is their fourth.
Yep, this is their fourth album. And I guess it was their first release on the Chrysalis label. It was released September 15th, 1972, the same day as John Denver's Rocky Mountain High.
Whoa.
Wanted to throw that in there for Jeremy.
And exactly a year and 2 weeks before I was born.
Oh, yeah, I was, you're 73.
I was a 73 September man.
30th?
Yes. Yeah, so close there. Yeah.
Well, where do we want to, before we talk any more about it, we should probably let people hear it. Where are we going to start?
Where are we? Are we going to go like sort of in the album order here
I think we had discussed Royal Forester, side A, track 5. I think that's a good place to start.
All right.
So let's do that.
I am a forester of his land, as ye may plainly see. It's the mantle of your maidenhead that I would have from thee. With me rude, rum-rority right, no wority an. He's taken her by the milk-white hand and by the leyland sleeve. He's laid her down upon her back and asked no man's leave. With me rude, rum-rority right, no wority an. Now since you've lain me down, young man, you must take me up again. And since you've had your wills of me, come tell to me your name. With me rude, rum-rority right, no wority an. Some call me Jim, some call me John, forget it's all the same. But when I'm in the king's high court, William is me name. With me rule, rum-rority right, no wority an. She being a good scholar, she spelt it o'er again. William, that's a Latin word, but Willie is your name. With me rule, rum-rority right, no wority an. Now when he heard his name pronounced, he mounted his high horse. She belted up her petticoat and pulled we all opposed. With me rule, rum-rority right, no wority an.
All right, gang, I'm just going to get this out of the way. I don't like this. And I derisively call it Ren Fair music to anger Peter. And I'm just not going to be talked into this one is the reality.
Ooh.
So I'm just...
We got a naysayer in the peanut gallery.
I know.
See, the thing is, it's funny is like there's not really like a drop of Anglo blood in my body. I'm like a Polish Russian Jew, and I don't know why my soul calls out to this music. I can't explain it. So that's if it doesn't. And it's funny because I had an old roommate. His name was Kieran O'Killy, and he hated this kind of shit because he grew up with it and he heard it all the time, and he was like, get this away from me. This is giving me flashbacks to everything freaky about my youth, and I don't have that.
Yeah.
Same way Christian hymns don't bother me very much. I'm like, this is great.
Yeah.
You know, people are like, church flashback, no.
Yeah.
You know, but to each their own. I can't explain why this stuff basically calls out to me.
Yeah.
I just wanted to throw it out there, get it behind us, and then all you lovers of it can just dive in and enjoy.
It's out of the way, and we can proceed forward. Well, and it's worth noting that these, this is 1972, as we said. This is their fourth album. These are not originals that they're performing. What would be the word for what they did?
I mean, I guess, they're kind of highly electrifying traditional songs, which at that point had not really been done very much. I mean, I guess you had Fairport Convention, who in a way Steeleye Span were almost an offshoot of because of Tiger Hutchings, Ashley Hutchings, because he went from Fairports. He wanted to do something kind of stick with something more traditional while they were going a little more folk rock, so they sort of set a precedent for this, but it just really hadn't been done much, at this point. So I think it's a thing that now people hear it, and you've heard Riverdance, you've heard every sort of electrified trad band that you're ever going to hear in your life. But I think it was a new notion to sort of take this music and sort of, contemporize it a little bit and sort of, even the arrangements are almost sort of progressive rock, and Chrysalis was a progressive rock label, like Tull was on, and stuff like, who are another band that kind of straddled a little bit of the traditional with the progressive,
Yeah,
so.
Ian Anderson from Jethro Tull produced some of their music.
Right, and Maddie is on a Tull record, so yeah, there is a bit of cross-pollination there a little bit.
Well, that one we just listened to, Royal Forester, in the liner notes to this, The Gatefold, which they were kind enough to give some background on how they came to find these songs and sort of their origins, or at least what they had available to them at the time. That one is listed as coming from the singing of John. It's either Strahan or Strachan, Strachan. He was a Scottish farmer and singer.
Strachan.
Yeah, Strachan. Yeah. He was a Scottish farmer and singer who had a repertoire of bothy ballads that had been passed down by word of mouth for over 200 years, which I wasn't really familiar with what, is it pronounced bothy? Bothy ballads.
I gotta admit, you got me a little bit there. I mean, I fashion myself a little bit of an ethnomusicologist, but there's certain things that are just like, beyond, like if we grew up in Britain, we would understand this stuff probably a bit more,
Yeah, this was interesting to me. Bothy ballads are songs sung by farm laborers in the northeast region of Scotland. Bothies are farm outbuildings where unmarried laborers used to sleep, often in harsh conditions, and in the evening to entertain themselves, these bothy bands sang. So John Strachan, or John Strahan, he was sort of this living vessel of these songs that had been passed down by word of mouth for over 200 years. His version of Peggy O was recorded by Bob Dylan as Pretty Peggy O on the first Dylan record, and also recorded by Simon and Garfunkel. The way he was recorded was actually Alan Lomax recording it. Yep. And this is based on a recording of him singing a piece called The Knight and the Shepherd's Daughter.
Interesting. Yeah, it kind of all comes back to that Lomax stuff.
Yeah.
Him and Shirley Collins going around and recording that stuff.
Yeah. So Lomax didn't just document in the United States. He went over to the UK and documented their folk music there as well.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, that's like the equivalent of, the worker who sleeps in the shed music is a lot like our blues and, work songs in the field and stuff like that. And it's important stuff to document.
Yeah.
And it might sound sort of frilly and Ren Fairish to us now, but at the time, these were the songs of the people. Mm-hmm. The salt of the earth.
I like that a little bit. You're starting to win me over.
Hey, those below the salt of the earth.
Below the salt, yes. Steeleye Span on this album are Matty Pryor singing, Tim Hart singing, as well as playing guitar, I think some other instruments as well. Peter Knight playing the fiddle, viola. It seems that sometimes it's credited as violin and sometimes credited as fiddle, depending on how it's used in the song.
Right. They're both a fiddle.
Yeah. We have Bob Johnson on guitar and Rick Kemp on bass. And Steeleye Span lineup was constantly shifting. But, we mentioned Ashley Hutchings from Fairport Convention had been a founder of Steeleye Span, and by this point, the fourth album, he is already departed.
He's gone. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Maddie really ended up, even Tim Hart leaves at one point down the line. So I think she ends up being like the only constant. But my absolute favorite lineup is probably the first record, Hark the Village Way. I mean, and this is crazy. The first record was 70. So they put their fourth record by 72. So they're putting out like 2 records a year here, basically, which, you know, is just by today's standards incomprehensible that bands could do that.
Yeah.
But it was very common back then. But it was like 2 couples. It was like the couple of Hart and Pryor, and then it was the Woods on that first record, Terry and Gay Woods, and it was a very different dynamic. And then, yeah, they left, and then eventually, you know, Ashley Hutchings left, and people were sort of slowly came in. Martin Carthy is a guy who sort of came in and out of the band as well.
Yeah. Yeah, the Woods, who were initially in the band, didn't they go on to form another group, or were they from another group?
They started just a thing called the Woods Band.
Okay,
and then they did a number of records together as Terry and Gay Woods, just the 2 of them. And then eventually Terry Woods joined the Pogues.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I think, but he was in Sweeney's Men pre all that, one of those sort of vocal groups or whatever.
Yeah.
Very traditional kind of stuff. Yeah, but I really love that. I mean, that's the thing, is like kind of like every era of the band. I mean, at least up until the end of the 70s, it's there's a level of consistency there. And, you know, I mean, sometimes the rock aspect is a little up. Sometimes the more magical medieval aspect is up. And this record, it's high. It's very high on this one. I'd confess, because they're doing all traditional ancient songs, whereas that changes a bit later.
Yeah, the first song of theirs that I discovered was their version of Two Magicians, which I found it by way of, I was listening to the band Current 93 with David Tibet, and they did that song as, I think it was called Old Coal Blacksmith on one of their records, and somehow I found the Steeleye Span version, which is Two Magicians, and just fell in love with it. Matty Pryor's voice and just that kind of jerky rock instrumentation combined with the traditional folk sound really appealed to me. And I think that might have been the first time that I really got that sound too, because I had listened to some Fairport prior to that and liked it. All right. Now I'm a huge Fairport Convention fan, but it took me a little while to fully get into this sort of traditional British folk sound updated for the 60s and 70s. You know, it wasn't instantaneous for me.
No, I don't think it was for me either, honestly. I mean, my gateway was probably like Incredible String Band and Donovan and, you know, the sort of headier side of the spectrum, and then, you know, sort of worked my way to the very traditional kind of stuff. I don't know if that immediately appealed to me as a young lad, you know, but
Sean, you're quiet over there. Where do you stand on the Steeleye?
The traditional UK folk inspired stuff has never really spoken to me.
We got 2. And then there were 2.
I've never hated it, you know? I've never been like a hater of it, because the thing is, like, I've always, you know, known some very well-respected record collectors like Steve who are super into this stuff, and Peter. So it's like I knew there was something here, and it wasn't like it was bad, but so that being said, I wanted to give like extra plays to this record before getting into this episode, just to see if I could get it to grow on me, and I'm getting pretty close, at least with this record. I really like the stuff that combines the electric instruments in more, and then the more I read about the lyrics and the intention and like the way this music is presented, it kind of made more sense to me, like what Jeremy was saying with this angle of music of the people. And also a lot of the lyrics in here are pretty dark, you know, they're presented in this kind of,
that's what I'm saying, these are like some murder ballads.
Yeah, totally. I mean, well, the song we just listened to has some like really heavy themes in it too, but a lot of them are presented in this kind of jaunty, fun, almost like hokey sounding way to modern ears. But there's a lot going on here, and yeah, I'm coming around to this record. I don't know if it's gonna like spark a whole fascination with the genre itself, but I gave it my best effort.
I think what grabbed him about me, I think maybe is it the one after this, Pleased to See the King? Or
It's right around the same time. It's hard for me to keep track of the order.
it's got some insane fuzzy wah-wah stuff going on it. And just on a like on a sonic level, I was like, whoa, I've never really heard that used in this sort of music's context before. And I think that's probably what really dragged me in, because I don't even listen to lyrics and stuff like that necessarily right away. That's kind of sinks in a little more for later for me and stuff. But just on a pure sonic level, I thought it was interesting. And this record too, there's some really insane sort of fuzzed up acoustic instruments, always just sonically are really insane sounding to me. It's a unique thing that isn't present in a lot of music. So yeah.
And they did a really good job on this album of like tastefully mixing it in. You don't just hear like the same electric sound kind of meandering throughout the entire track. Like it comes in at key moments and in just the right amount and really elevates the song.
Totally.
Well, the next song that we were going to feature does not include any instrumentation other than the voices of the band. It's an a cappella number called Gaude Te, and also, as a disclaimer to our listeners, we have opted, because the band chose to mix this rather strangely on the record, which I guess to my understanding is to resemble the sound of a choir in the distance getting closer, passing you by, and then walking like down the street.
It's very hazy and reverby on the record.
That's the way it was mixed on the album. We have opted to play you the single version, which stays at the same volume throughout the duration of the track. So we'll speak more about this this Christmas song that we're playing here in the month of October when we come back. But let's listen to Gaude Te.
Gaude te, Christus es natus, ex Maria Virgine. Gaude te, Christus es natus, ex Maria Virgine. Gaude te.
Deposatis gratiae hoc quod optimamus, Carmine latitiae devoti redamus.
Gaude te, Christus es natus, ex Maria Virgine. Gaude te, Christus es natus, ex Maria Virgine. Gaude te.
Deus homo factus est natura mirante, mundus renovatus est a Christo regnante.
Gaude te, Christus es natus, ex Maria Virgine. Gaude te, Christus es natus, ex Maria.
Peter forced me to buy the single as well as the LP so that I could get the proper version.
I already had it. I got a UK pressing. Real cheap over there, because as we were discussing, this was a hit.
This was a hit
It was
song.
a hit.
We just blew Jeremy's mind when we were listening to that.
Yeah.
Telling him that
I was surprised that the song was on a 45 and that, Peter cared so much about it. And I'm listening to him like, it's just a cappella. And then I was like, this was a hit too. And was very surprised. And, I was like, why would they ever choose this as a single? Why was this a hit? But at the same time, this song has been getting stuck in my head multiple times a day for like the past few days while getting ready for this episode. So there's something there.
Well, it was a hit in the UK, and like this is their traditional music. So it's like, I think, this sort of, that kind of melody and everything sort of touches a chord with people that it would never hear. I was trying to think of the American equivalent. We don't have ancient melodies to connect to because we're not ancient, but I guess the, equivalent would be like some sort of like novelty folk country song or something, on the radio.
Coming round the mountain.
Yeah, or something. Yeah. Like, oh, it's a hit, Like, I mean, I guess I heard someone cranking "Devil Came Down to Georgia" out of their car the other day, and I was like, could anyone elsewhere like appreciate this like hillbilly trash? No, so I mean, maybe that's the equivalent. I don't know.
I think you could make comparisons to like the U.S. folk revival scene, with like Kingston Trio.
There you
and stuff,
go.
and then
Yeah.
into Bob Dylan. Like it's a similar kind of approach. Which I was going to ask, like, do you guys know what was the like main audience for this stuff when it came out? Was this like a younger countercultural movement, or was it like a mixed multi-generational thing?
I think it kind of was. I mean, as far as I guess they were on like a major label, and so were Fairport and some of the other sort of folk bands. But I think they were definitely for young people. I mean, there's a cool concert you can find on the YouTube, and so I think it was officially released where it's like them and Matthew Southern Comfort. It's got to be around this time, and it's all hippies in the audience. If you look watching it, I mean, I think. Kind of like here, here's the equivalent. Country Joe's like fixing to dye rag, where he's doing like 1, 2, 3. And you see hippies like, and they're in these videos and they were loving this, and you hear it now and you're like, yuck, a little bit sometimes. But I think it was nostalgic for them too.
That's true. There's that trend of, late 60s psych albums always having the ragtime sounding song.
I call it shag time.
Yeah, okay,
because it's like da, 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 but that's Paul McCartney's fault, really. It's not any American's fault. We'll blame Sir Paul. I'm sorry.
Sir Paul taking the fall. So just a little background on Gaudete. It's a sacred Christmas carol thought to have been written in the 16th century and first published in a collection of Finnish and Swedish sacred songs in the year 1582. That was called the Pii Cantiones. So it's in Latin. The song is sang in Latin. What they're repeating throughout is "Rejoice, rejoice! Christ is born of the Virgin Mary. Rejoice." That's what Gaudete.
Hey, I'm learning here today.
I had never had any idea. I haven't brushed up on my Latin lately.
Yeah.
It was a big hit, number 14 in the UK in 1973.
Someone took objection to that.
Guitarist Bob Johnson had heard the song when he attended a folk carol service with his father-in-law in Cambridge, and then brought the song to the attention of the rest of the band. And it's the single is one of only 3 top 50 British hits to be sung fully in Latin, and probably also among the only hit songs that are a cappella.
You can name them on one hand, probably.
Don't Worry, Be Happy.
Yeah.
And my knowledge drops off.
The Longest Time.
True, I think that is all.
Sorry, just pulled that one out of my Billy Joel butt.
Well, we've talked a little bit about the history of the band, because it was Matty Pryor and Tim Hart who were recording together as a duo before the band formed, with the Woods and Ashley Hutchings and all of them, correct?
Doing traditional songs. Yeah. And I didn't realize by this album they were broken up. They were not actually a couple, and she was actually going out with Rick Kemp by this point.
Oh, wow. Oh, they're getting into some like Fleetwood Mac.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that. And Rick Kemp, it should be noted, on bass, is a badass. He played on the best Michael Chapman records. He was like Chapman's right hand bass player, man. Yeah. Okay. He's on all the good. If you look, he's on all the good Chapman records and stuff. So like I hold him in like a sort of especially high regard.
Yeah.
So I guess so did Maddie.
Yeah. Yeah, and she is the one constant member of the band throughout the decades and decades that they, as far as I can tell, that the band has still in some iteration been around to this day.
I saw him a couple of years ago and did a brief interview with her, and yes, it was definitely Matty Pryor and some guys.
Yeah.
I mean, some who've been playing with her for a while at this point, but yeah, and they did obviously stuff off these classic records. You know, but yeah, still going strong. As long as Matty Pryor is still going, Steeleye Band is still going. Yes, basically.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy with moving right along with the selections at this point. We had discussed playing the track Sheep Crook and Black Dog, which was one that you had been stoked on playing. And I think, how did you feel about this track, Sean?
This might be my favorite track on the album, honestly.
Yeah, it's one of mine too. Yeah.
Yeah.
You got some fuzz, you got some cool arrangement.
It's got a really good vibe. Yeah, a good mix of fuzz in there.
Just like this is the one I would say where the arrangement is sort of like almost like progressive rock. You know, it's sort of like things are coming in and out of the mix, and it's full band too. You know, it's definitely not a madrigal of just voices or whatever. But I think you can't really compare it to any of their music in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a slow burn.
Yeah, this is their thing.
Awesome. Let's listen to Sheep, Crook, and Black Dog, Side A, Track 4.
Here's my sheep crook and my black dog. I give it to you. Here's my bag and my budget. I bid it adieu. Here's my sheep crook and my black dog. I leave them behind. Fine a laurel, a fine a floral. You proved all unkind. Here's my sheep crook and my black dog. I give it to you. Here's my bag and budget. I bid it adieu. Here's my sheep crook and my black dog. I leave them behind. Fine a laurel, a fine a floral. You proved all Oh, to my dear Dinah, these words I did say. Tomorrow we'll be married, love. Tomorrow we'll...
I think that's one of the best showcases for the power of Maddie Pryor's voice on this album.
Mm-hmm.
I have not seen her perform live, but I can imagine she's very captivating.
She's got a powerful voice, and then she also kind of has that. I guess I've seen it sometimes describe these sort of traditional British vocal. It's like cut glass, you know. It's like so perfect and sort of the past or something like that. And Judy Dybel, I think, had it too from early Fairport Convention.
Yeah, the first singer before Sandy Denny.
There's something perfect about it, you know. I don't know how to put it, but yeah, and again, just she can wail too, like at her thing, you know. But yeah, kind of one of my favorite British female vocalists for sure.
That was collected from a singer named Queen Caroline Hughes, who was born in 1900 in a horse-drawn caravan at Bear Regis in Dorset, England. I guess she was a prolific and impressive singer, and she'd been recorded by Ewan MacColl and Peggy Seeger and Peter Kennedy in the 1960s, and she had died in 1972, the year this album
Oh wow,
came out. So
I've been to Dorset too. It's nice.
oh yeah,
It's very pastoral, sort of. It's kind of what, you know. It's like Cornwall or some of these other places you hear about. You could see little elves and fairies kind of, you know, flying in the fields or something kind of place, you know.
yeah.
Just a cool arrangement on that song. I mean, the way things sort of come in and out of the mix, and then that nice little classical guitar figure sort of comes in there.
That turnaround.
Yeah, it's just sophisticated. I mean, it's like her voice is sort of the constant in the song while everything sort of comes in and out and plays around it, which is like just a unique way of arranging, you know?
Yeah.
I think that song was an easier entry for me as well, because it reminds me a lot of some of the prog stuff that I do listen to. Thinking about bands like Gentle Giant.
That band Renaissance kind of, yeah,
too. Renaissance, a great example. But like a lot of the bands, even Yes and stuff, would have these folk elements and interludes and stuff.
True.
And mix it in with a heavier song. So like that made sense to me. And like hearing these songs, I was like, okay, I get that angle now. And honestly, a lot of this is just an acquired taste. You know, if you don't have any background in kind of like traditional folk styles of any place, it's going to seem really off-putting at first. And once you get past that, then the choices on the arrangements and the vocals and the instrumentation start to open up a lot more and have a lot more weight to them when you listen to this record.
I think Pentangle were kind of like that for me too, who now are like one of my absolute favorites of that. But they're sort of like traditional songs and maybe a little more jazz in it, you know. But I think both would have been branded progressive folk, you know, and for the time, Chrysalis, Transatlantic Records. There were a few labels that seemed to, some Harvest stuff that seemed to do like progressive folk. It was a thing, you know. It was a weird thing.
Normally, at this point, we would turn to Sean and ask for recommended similar albums that you can usually find relatively cheap, but I did not want to do that to him, being that this is not his bread and butter. So I thought I would name a couple, and Steve, if you want to name a couple in your repertoire of this kind of music, I think we can do that at this point. I mean, and you just mentioned one that I was planning to mention, Pentangle's Basket of Light, which probably should be a $10 to $15 record, but I see it for $5 or less so often. For those who don't know, Pentangle was the band of Bert Jansch. He was in that group at that time, as well as who is the singer's name?
Jackie McShee.
Yes.
Who I did have the pleasure of seeing once as before. And another cut glass vocal from her right there. It's like perfect.
Yeah. Perfect. And who's the other one? John Renbourn?
John Renbourn.
Yep.
Danny Thompson on bass. One of the all-time great session stand-up bass players as well. Tony Cox on drums.
Mm-hmm. So Pentangle, we made eventually, Taylor Rowley, frequent guest of the show, told me that she buys a copy of Basket of Light every time she sees it.
And just gives it to someone. I have some records like that as well. I think Buffy St. Marie's Illuminations was one of those for a long time. $1, give it to your buddy. You know, now it's like 30.
I know it's when I was in Philadelphia with Sean last week, I found a copy for 12, and he was like, "Buy that right now." 12 is a pretty good price for that record.
I know.
The other album that I was going to recommend is a Maddie Pryor solo album, "Woman in the Wings," which is she does a couple tracks on there where she departs into like jazzier stuff, and she even does one that's like the Andrews Sisters on there. And so
she could do it all.
Yeah, it's cool to hear an example of what her voice can do when not in this more traditional folk vein on that record. But that's one that if you find it, it probably won't cost you too much. So those are the couple I have. Do you have any in mind?
Yeah, I was actually going to say she did some other records we were discussing for Silly Sisters with June Tabor, who has a very similar voice. It's almost hard to tell them apart sometimes on that record, but I got that record in a dollar bin for real. And June's records, sometimes with this guy Martin Simpson, are really good too, and I don't think people know it. I feel like folk rock, especially from like the late 70s and 80s, people don't know what to do with, and they don't always have very good covers, and they just sort of languish in the bin. Maybe also I would say on the American trad end, you have like Mimi and Richard Farina records, always $1. You know, Ian and Sylvia, do a lot of traditional covers, always $1. You know,
that's one the Canadian folk.
Yeah.
I've been planning to do an Ian and Sylvia record for a long time, and just
I like all those records. You know, a little different, I guess, but they all. I saw Ian Matthews from Fairport Convention do a whole show of Richard Farina songs, so there's cross pollination there of those as well. But I always urge people to pick those. Eric Anderson, another kind of like underrated, sort of poetic, folky. I always tell people to buy those for $1 too.
Yeah. the stuff's out there, and people don't care enough yet that you can still find it pretty cheap.
Check your folk bins.
Yeah.
Check your folk bins, because there's a lot of good stuff in there, and it's still cheap and not totally pillaged yet,
Yeah. Well, while you're here, we thought it would also be fun, since we're focusing on the year 1972, being that it's 50 years since 1972, to just get some of your thoughts on that year in music. I don't necessarily have a good jumping off point. At the beginning of the season, we dropped a heavy list of some of the major records released that year, like David Bowie, Ziggy Stardust, Rolling Stones, Exile on Main Street, but I didn't even, there were some that, obviously there were plenty that I didn't even think when I was dropping the list to mention. I think there were many people that put out 2 albums that year. I think Captain Beefheart might have dropped both Clear Spot and Spotlight Kid that year. T-Rex the Slider. There's just so many albums that year. But if you have any kind of thoughts on what music was like at that time, or what, it seems like a particularly magical year in music.
Yeah, I mean, all the early 70s were, in a way, as we were saying before, I'm like, was there a bad record made in 1972?
Oh, yeah.
I feel like it'd be more of a challenge to find one, because the production was all good. Ideas were fresh in all these genres you mentioned, like you even had Black Sabbath and, putting out, there's so much that had just not been done yet in glam, hard rock, folk rock, psych rock, progressive rock, every genre, jazz rock. I feel like all these were still in their sort of like cool experimentation phase, where everything was still fresh, yet you still had a 60s hangover in everything a little bit. So like, I don't think the full on 70s had come in yet, as far as like, I used to be such a capper at about 75, because, that's when I thought like sort of like prog rock and funk and a lot of things sort of like took a disco-y, started to take more of a slicker turn. Now I've amended that a little bit, because everything sounds so inorganic. I'm like, ooh, a record from 1978? This sounds great. This sounds like it was recorded on a 4-tray. It sounds so organic compared to what is done today. So I've amended it a little bit, but yeah, I just think everything was just so fresh, and I think the underground and the overground, if you will, of music was still a little blurred, because you had like labels like Harvest and Island and stuff that were pretty much simultaneously putting out bands of both, and
Yeah.
it was like a band like Free, mainstream band or an underground band, I don't even know, or Hawkwind or something. It's like they were having a hit, I think Silver Machine hit in 72 or right around there. So it's like, I think an underground band could have a hit in 1972 is another thing.
Well, yeah, like marketing choices weren't ruled by the algorithms at that point. So a lot of times it was just people being like, well, maybe the kids are into weird shit these days. Like, let's see if this one hits.
I think carried over from the 60s when they just started, when you had Cap Records signing like the Silver Apples, who'd, if they went from like Jack Jones to Silver Apples, they were like, this is just some weird stuff the kids like, and then that grew into like its whole thing, like labels that specifically did that and were funded by major labels.
Even the early 70s, there's some weird stuff that entered the top 40. I think it was 1970, but you have Blood Rock scoring a top 40 hit with DOA, which is just not something, or even just a little earlier than that, Arthur Brown getting a hit with Fire in the late 68. There's just a time where very weird stuff could sit right beside, stuff that would be in your average
and
American.
It would fuel more weird stuff, because they'd be like, this weird thing's a hit, let's Fire was even a hit on AM, FM, and black radio, basically at the time, because they didn't know if it was a white guy, and he'd show up at gigs and people would be like, whoa, like they didn't know, because it was a little more mysterious in those days.
Cool. Well, we could chat with you all day about this stuff, Steve, but thank you so much for joining us to talk the year 1972 and Steeleye Span, and for backing me up with Ren Fair music.
You know, the funny thing is, I have never been to a Ren Fair.
Yeah.
I've never gone. It doesn't appeal to me. I don't really want to dress up in the period stuff and eat a meat thing on a big meat thing. And
not my bag at all, but based on this album cover, the fact that I
would think I would enjoy the hell out of it, you know, but I've never gone there. Yeah.
We haven't discussed that yet, but the album cover, there's no doubt that you're going to hear exactly what you hear when you put this record on. When I was letting the guys know what the selection was going to be, I sent that, and Jeremy was like, why do I suddenly feel betrayed? How Ren Fair is that album?
I mean, the font alone is Ren Fair, but then, yes, they're all at like having a feast in like hoods and, you know, monk-like robes, basically. Period garb. So they're going for it. But then actually, if you look at them, they all look a little wasted on the cover a little bit too. So that's, you know, that's a factor.
You know, before we get out of here, we should mention the album cover a little bit. To my knowledge, it's the band on the front and the back.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Even on the, like in the inner gatefold, it has a little like legend identifying each member who they are
on the back cover.
On the back,
yeah, I thought that was cool.
Right.
And the period gear is they're more like peasants on the front and kind of like royalty on the back.
Yeah,
and then you can see like on the back they have like the really nice spread of food, and then on the front they're eating the table scraps that are literally being thrown to them that they're catching. Which goes with the title of the album, Below the Salt, which we kind of alluded to, but we didn't actually drop the definition. The idea being that salt was a rare and expensive commodity at that point, so only the upper class would be able to use salt in their food. So if you were below the salt, you were part of the lower class that was only eating the table scraps and not actually able to even season the food that you're eating.
Yeah. It's heavy. I had never thought about it till I read about that.
I gotta admit, I did not either.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I truly did not. Yeah.
One more detail that I wanted to mention on this record is it was produced and engineered by the band along with a guy named Jerry Boys. And at first I was confused. I thought, is that multiple people, Jerry Boys? He's produced a ton of stuff, or engineered on tons of stuff, including Vashti Bunyan, Just Another Diamond Day.
Oh.
And he did some REM records, Level 42.
Wow.
Yeah, and he did the Fotheringay record as well, Sandy Denny's other band, aside from Fairport.
All good stuff you won't find in the dollar bin.
Yeah. It's funny because Fairport Convention, like the cat's out of the bag on that.
Yeah.
Sandy Denny, Fairport Convention, Richard Thompson, you're gonna throw down money for that stuff.
Yeah, these days. Vashti Bunyan, you're going to show down hundreds of dollars.
Yeah. Did you interview Vashti Bunyan?
I did actually.
Amazing.
She was everything you would hope her to be. I'll just say that. Basically, my massive crush on her continued after it was continued after the interview.
That's good. You wouldn't want it to go the other way.
No.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Steve. Plastic Crime Wave Krakow. Do you have anything that you'd like to plug? I have. I know that you told me the other day when we were setting things up that you're working on the next issue of the Galactic Zoo dossier.
Slowly but surely, yes.
Which is a zine that you've been illustrating and compiling interviews with a lot of psych folk related musicians for. What issue is the next one going to be? You've been doing it for 25 plus
years? I know,
years?
and I'm only on number 11, so that goes to show you how often these things come out. But yes, there is a Matty Pryor interview. Martin Carthy, who was in the band, not at this point, but other points. It'll happen. One of these days. I'll just throw out plastercrimewave.com. There's usually what I have going on.
There it is. Excellent.
So are we going to close on the
John
Barleycorn?
John Barleycorn is what we're going to do.
It's just a folk tune I've always loved, and tons of people have covered this one. Traffic does a great version. Mm-hmm. Speaking of another band that was killing it in 72. And kind of going trad folk, kind of going progressive, kind of was just a thing. Just a great mournful folk tune.
And this is the only piece that really prominently features the voice of Tim Hart that we're going to play today. So you will not be hearing He was probably in Gaudete, but that was a choir.
Right. Yeah, you can hear him in songs for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yep. So Tim Hart will be the voice you hear on this final selection, John Barleycorn. And with that, I think we are ready to wrap up another episode of I'd Buy That for $1. Thank you so much for listening. And my name is Peter Cook.
I'm Jeremy Ruggles.
I'm Sean Hartman.
I'm Plastic Crime Wave.
There were 3 men came from the west, their fortunes for to tell, and the life of John Barleycorn as well. They have laid him in 3 furrows deep, laid clods upon his head. Then these 3 men made a solemn vow, John Barleycorn was dead. John Barleycorn was dead. And they let him alive for a very long time, till the rain from heaven did fall. Then little Sir John, he sprang up his head, and he did amaze them all. He did amaze them all. And they let him stand till the midsummer day, till he looked both pale and wan. Then little Sir John, he grew along